One of the ways that I rise above the noise is a combination of picking a niche and going targeted into it, but also pulling out my story so that people can authentically connect. And I live by the life that, love me or leave me. I would rather people get so much from my content and that they love what I do, or hate me, and be polarizing. I have no problem with that.
You're talking about things that you've struggled with and how you've used that again through mistakes and failure. Some people, you can't say anything to them without them being outraged, whereas you say if someone disagrees with you, see that as an opportunity and actually listen to what they've got to say and try and see it from their viewpoint.
Failure is part of the process, and failure isn't final. Failure is feedback.
Welcome to Embracing Marketing Mistakes, the podcast where we dive into the lessons and stories from the world's top marketers. I'm Chris Norton, and today's guest is Brian Keane, best-selling author of The Fitness Mindset and the book that I read, Rewire Your Mindset. Brian is not just a fitness entrepreneur, he's also an endurance athlete who has completed grueling challenges like Sahara Ultra Marathons and 230-kilometre Arctic treks, all whilst he actually hates running. He is massive online. He's got 250,000 TikTok followers, 160,000 Instagram followers, and almost 15,000 on YouTube. Through his experiences, he's developed a unique perspective on resilience, branding, and persistence, which he shares with audiences worldwide on the corporate stage. I got him on the show as I listened to his audiobook and I found it really useful as it helped me with my mindset during sport, but it works for any practice, whether that's football, business, and of course, marketing. And Brian has literally written a book about learning from mistakes. So today, we unpack the lessons that Brian has learned from the fitness world and how that can transform our approach to marketing. From building an authentic personal brand everywhere online to rewiring your mindset after big setbacks. Brian's insights are going to be hugely invaluable for anyone looking to overcome challenges, whether in business or in pleasure. So, as always, sit back, relax, and let's hear how you can apply the principles of a strong mindset to build a brand that lasts and thrives. Enjoy. Brian Keane, welcome to the show.
Lads, thank you so much for having me on.
So, Brian, I came across you in a very unusual situation. You've written a book called Rewire Your Mindset. In fact, you've written, how many books is it?
We are coming into the fifth one. It'll be out in January.
Oh, all right, another book. There you go. That's good. So I listened to Rewire Your Mindset, and the reason being is that outside of work, this will be a shocker, but I'm not a professional athlete like yourself. I've got something. Will does badminton. I do squash. We don't try and compete each other outside of work. But I'm in leagues and stuff, and I realised that I was getting to the point in the games, and I'd get to in squash you've got to win by 2 points, and it goes to 15, and I'd get to 13 and think I'm going to win, and then every time I'd just throw it all away and end up losing 15-13 or 16-14. And I thought, right, this is mindset because I'm winning the games, but I'm getting to the... So I thought, I'll listen to an interesting book. And I went on the internet and looking at different books, and yours sounded really interesting. So anyway, I started listening to your book, and then I got about 3 chapters in, and I was like, and all you talk about all the way through is how you failed and up and made mistakes and learned from it. And I'm like, we need to get this guy on the pod. So that's why I got you on. So do you want to tell me how you got? Do you want to tell Will and I how you got into what you do now and how you've set about building the empire that you've got?
Thanks so much, Chris. And yeah, and it's funny because one of the jokes that I have on my channels, on my platforms is I'm basically turning all my ups into profit because you're just using it to write books, you're using it to create courses, you're using it to create programs, you're using it to create content. And nearly 80 to 90% of everything I've created is just off mistakes I've made and learning from those mistakes and moving forward and failing forward with it. And a long story short, I was a primary school teacher. So I worked in the UK, in London, for 4 years as a primary school teacher. But for 2 of those years, I was working as a personal trainer in a gym at nighttime and at weekends and in evenings and then during school holidays. And in 2014, I decided, right, this is my 3rd attempt at making a fitness business work because I went broke twice. I made so many stupid mistakes in business. from trying to look the part, getting business cards, getting gear, getting like all the kit of with my logos, and I had no clients. So trying to look the part without being the part, every mistake you could probably make when it comes to going from 0 to 1 with the business I made. And then on attempt number 3, in 2014, I said, right, I'm going to give this one final go. I'm going to move back home to the west of Ireland. I've been personal training in a gym now for 2 years. I've got quite decent at my craft. If I don't make it work, I will go back on the teaching registry in the summer and I'll get a job for that September. This was 2014. And then over the space of 2 months, it ended up doing better than I ever thought. I actually ended up getting a waiting list that had to bring on other trainers underneath me to clear that waiting list. And then the business kind of grew and scaled from that point onwards. And then in 2015, my daughter was born and I was competing at it was the WBFF World. So I traveled around. I was in fitness modeling and things like that. So bodybuilding shows, fitness modeling, magazines, things along those lines. And I went into that space to help cement my name or bring my name up as a trainer. So people will want to come to me, want to work with me. And it did all of that and more. And in 2015, my daughter was born. I was preparing for the Worlds in Vegas. And I said, right, this is something I'm going to have to stop doing. I need to leave this world of bodybuilding. It's making me really narcissistic. It's making me really self-centered. I'm walking around like a calorie depleted zombie. I'm going to be a crap dad. I'm going to be shit at everything I do except for bodybuilding. I need to get out of this and remove myself from it. And said, I'm going to move my business online. And I gave it a 6-month window of, I want to spend more time with my daughter. I don't want to miss the pivotal moments of her life growing up. And I moved the business online in 2016. And then that's where everything just went skyrocketed to the moon. I wrote my first book, The Fitness Mindset, in 2017. It was 16 weeks on the Amazon bestseller list. It was bestseller in the stores it went into in Ireland. It sold over 350,000 copies to date. And it opened up all these other business doors and for scaling, for growing, with programs, for fitness programs online. The mindset element was something that people really grasped onto. So I then wrote Rewire Your Mindset, the book you mentioned, which again has done tremendously well, more than 100,000 copies to date in terms of what it sold. And I was able to go into corporate speaking. I was able to set up a separate business, which is business consulting now. So now I split my time with my fitness company, where I've got staff, fitness programs, courses, books, speaking in health and wellness. And then I've got a consulting business where I help and mentor different gym owners, personal trainers, online coaches. And I spend all my business time doing that. And again, have built up a very, I want to say very fulfilling business, something that I love to do, what I would do for free. I talk about in Rewire Your Mindset, asking, what would you do for free? And that's something that I get to do on a daily basis now with the people that I work with. And I've built a podcast, social media, the books, all these incredible things that I've been lucky enough to do. And that's, again, not a very short version, but it's a shorter version condensed down into, the last 10 years or so. So yeah, that's what got me to this point here.
But the way that you've done it is you've looked, because when you talk about your mindset, you talk about focusing on things that you enjoy. And so like they're saying, if you hate your job, just think about what you can do about that. And and one of the things that I'm living by at the moment, I think I told you this on email when we got you on the show, before we got you on the show. You said all the way through the book, you keep saying, if you've got something you hate, but you know it's better for you, just do it anyway. And every morning I'm getting into an ice bath. And at the moment, today
Chris.
it's -2. It was this morning. I had to peel off the ice off the top to get in. And I've still got your voice in my head going, if you hate it, get in and do it anyway. And it's true, isn't it? Like, to push through. So yeah, I think that's what really resonated with me, is that people put things off. Like, they put everything off. They'll put the worst interview off. They'll put the worst client meeting off. They'll put appointments off. And that's what you were doing, right? And that's when, in your first 2 businesses, what you were talking about there. Actually, as a teacher, you were a teacher first, which you haven't really mentioned. And you didn't get the buzz that you thought you would get from it, right?
Yeah, so the story I talk about in Rewire Your Mindset, and I mentioned this in the Fitness Mindset too, the first book, was when I became a teacher, it felt like I had spent years climbing a ladder only to realize it was up against the wrong wall. And the sunk cost fallacy of spending time, energy, and money to become qualified in this area. And I was about half an hour into my first ever day of a year 3 classroom, and with 30 kids in front of me. And I was like, I don't want to be a teacher. And it happened to me fast. I knew day one, this isn't what I want to do. And part of the problem with why it took me so long to leave it was, one, not having the confidence. And confidence comes from either repeatedly keeping promises to yourself or building competence and then letting confidence grow on top of that. I didn't have the belief that there was something else out there for me. I was like, I've done, and I got stuck in this story of, I've spent 4 years doing this. I've told everyone I was going to be a teacher. What will people think? I can't leave this career now. And I felt like I had just spent and wasted a chunk of my life. I was a very young man at the time, but at the time it didn't feel like that. I just felt like I had spent years wasting all this time, energy, money, and focus. And it was the ladder being up against the wrong wall. And I still use that analogy to this day. Relationships, business, fitness goals, things with my daughter. Is my ladder up against the right wall? And asking the question, which I didn't always do, was, am I enjoying this process? Am I enjoying climbing this ladder? Or is it for my greater good? You mentioned there about the ice baths. Like, nobody wants to jump into a fucking -2 ice bath, no. But you feel better after. Like, it's what I call in the book, the anchors of self-discipline. I'm very vocal about my dislike for running, and I run ultramarathons. So I've done Marathon des Sables, I've ran through the Arctic, I've ran 100-mile ultramarathons. I hate running. I hate it. It's so hard. It never gets any easier. It breaks my body to bits. But it's something that builds a lot of self-discipline for me because I don't find it easy. Whereas I lift weights and I find it quite easy. I'm from a sports background. Like, I can build muscle quite easily from that background. They're not struggles for me. But running anything over 10 kilometers may as well be 100 miles every single time because it just doesn't come easy. But that self-discipline crosses over and allows me to do the things I have to do regardless of how I feel. And that's what you're doing in the morning, Chris, with the ice bath. You're conditioning yourself with a small win at the start of the day to do something that you know is better for you, but you don't necessarily want to do. And that tends to compound positively in other areas of your life as well, from business to relationships to fitness.
Yeah, Will, I don't do marathons. My wife's run a marathon. Will's run a few, haven't you?
I've run one marathon, and I must admit it's the hardest thing I've ever done. But I'm a big believer in that as well. I think running mentally conditions you for almost everything else in your life, doesn't it? So if for the average, the average person listening to this podcast who's probably in some kind of marketing job, how can they, and they'll be doing things in their day-to-day job that they love doing, they'll be doing things that they hate doing. Sort of taking a step back then, how can they improve their mindset and their I suppose ultimately their success at work through your techniques? I mean, they'll be wondering how we can apply this to the professional world,
without walking away from the job. You mean, like you didn't?
Because that's not always an option, is it? So is it teachable? Is there practical steps?
Yep.
Anybody can apply.
Yeah, 100%. I think it depends on the context and the danger being in the dose. I think 80-20 rule, Pareto's principle, is helpful here. If 80% of your day you hate what you're doing in marketing, in business, you do have to ask the question, is my ladder against the wrong wall? Like, if you're spending 80% of your time, 80% of your day, every single day, and I'm not talking just sprint moments when it's a tough week, a tough month. We all have that in every career that we'll ever go into. But if you look back on the last 3 years and 80 to 90% of that time you've hated it, it might be worth asking, do I need to shift my ladder against another wall? And again, it's not easy. You can have mortgage, kids, family, commitments, but even just giving yourself that little bit of mental freedom that this isn't forever, it means you can persevere with it a little bit more on the front end. Same as a marathon, you know that those 26.2 miles are going to end at some point. So you just keep moving forward and put one step in front of the other. But it doesn't make it any easier. It's still really difficult, but you know it's going to end. So if you're in that 80 to 90%, I would ask that question. If you are in a job or marketing capacity that is just, there's difficult moments, mental gymnastics is huge. So putting a positive reframe on situations, because it's normally not the thing that bothers us, it's the emotion we attach to it. So even reframing the language into something that you get to do versus something that you have to do. So when you have a meeting with somebody that's like, oh my God, like I have a new book coming out in January, and I'll tell a story which might tie in nicely with this because everyone has got one of these people in their work. So when I worked as a teacher, in West London, there was another teacher in the school, and he was a grade A complainer. He was one of these people that, you know, there was a silver lining in every cloud. You know, there was if he was, you know, his wallet was too heavy because of all his money, his wife was too sexy. Oh, he's one of these people that would find a complaint with everything. And I remember I got put on lunch duty with him. And which basically means in a school that you twice a week, you have to go on lunch duty on just basically out in the, keeping an eye on the kids for 45 minutes of the hour lunch break. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to be stuck with this guy who's going to complain and moan for the entire duration. And lo and behold, we went out the first day and he complained about everything from, you know, he was a big football fan, about how his team played the night before, how his wife was in his ear the night before, how his kids never listened to him, to the boss, to the principal in the school, and how he just wasn't giving him what he needed. It went on and on and on and on and on and on. And I remember coming back the second week going, oh my God, I'm actually going to blow my brains out if I have to go out on that playground again. And I thought, right, I actually need to completely reframe the situation. I need to turn it into a game. So I said, right, fuck it. The next time I go out, I'm going to count how many times he complains in a 45-minute period. So I rocked out that Tuesday, and 3 seconds, bang, first thing, giving out about his wife. So I had a little bit of a chuckle to myself, and I was like, okay, this is going to be fun. 3 seconds in, he's already on one. And then every time he complained, I was just making these mental tallies in my head. He was one of these people that actually wasn't really listening to what I was saying anyway. He was just giving out. So I was making these mental tallies in my head. And that situation ended up becoming so fun that every Tuesday and Thursday I used to look forward to going out in the playground, and I would count how many times he was complaining. And what a weird thing happened after that, when I started to change the way I was looking at him, the things I was looking at him started to change. I started to realize he was actually quite funny, and he was quite sarcastic, but he was quite witty. And he was also the first one, if you got into the shit, he would cover for you. And I made a lot of mistakes as a new teacher, and he covered for me a lot. All stuff I had failed to see, I completely missed prior to this. And I understood then that, oh, okay, this is all about how I'm seeing the situation and reframing the situation. And we go through scenarios in life, with work, with marketing tasks, with jobs, with interviews, with things we have to do that feel like a massive struggle. And we need to figure out, well, I can't get out of this. I can't pull out of lunch duty and say, I want to request to go with somebody else. That wasn't an option. So I had to completely change the way I saw the situation. Everybody has a version of that in their work with things they do. And sometimes you have to put a positive reframe or some mental gymnastics on top of the situation and change the way you're seeing it, whether it's an individual, because a lot of discomfort tends to come from individuals. They tend to be the ones that stir up the emotions, the anger, the sadness, the frustration. So it's changing the relationship with them. And then you might have a similar situation to me. And if you're curious, he ended up with 72 was his record complaints in a 45-minute window, which I couldn't help but be impressed by.
What's that, about 1.8 complaints per minute or something like that?
That's fucking good going. By anyone's standard, that is good going. That is really good going.
Yeah. I mean, you also talk in the book about the book that I've listened to. You talk about the way that you take people, because first of all, you're quite big on social media. So which is your favorite platform? It's either Instagram or TikTok, is it?
I actually favorite, or the one that I use the most, because they're
okay. Both. Answers. Let's go both. Which is your favorite?
Well, I hate all social media, so I don't like any of them.
Right. Okay.
I love my podcast, but I like creating on Instagram. Now, I'm very good with my audience. I reply to my DMs, reply to my comments. I create. I'm not a fan of social. If I didn't have a business, I wouldn't be on any of them. If I'm being honest, and I've got quite a decent following on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, smaller on YouTube, about 14,000 on YouTube. But I create it because it's really good for business. It's really good for serving people. But there's a lot of negativity. I'm not a massive fan. The only thing I would do, and I don't know if I talk about this in Rewire Your Mindset or the new book, I can't remember because they're merging in my heads now, but the, what would you do if you won the lottery? Like, you know, I asked myself the question, I would do everything I'm doing now if I won $1 billion tomorrow, but I would probably drop out the amount of time I spend on social. But I would keep the podcast, I would write the books, I would do the interviews, I would have the business helping and serving people, but I'd probably eliminate the social media because it's not my favorite way to consume. Or not my favorite way to create either.
Yeah, because that's the point I was trying to make, because you were talking earlier about people's opinions and how you reframe people's opinions and how you're looking at it. And one of the things I found interesting when you were talking about is you mentioned that when you meet people, they criticize, they don't agree with you, and you use that as feedback, because he said if someone doesn't agree with you, don't just get angry. Which is fascinating, because usually some people, you can't say anything to them without them being outraged. Whereas you say, if someone disagrees with you, see that as an opportunity and actually listen to what they've got to say and try and see it from their viewpoint, which sounds great. But if someone comes in hard for you, everybody thinks, oh, I'm under attack, defend, don't they? And social media, especially those platforms, you're going to get a lot of that, aren't you? Whether that's people outside marketing brands, they'll get criticized online as well. So how do you deal with that? Because the brand is yourself and your books and everything that you're doing on Mindset. People criticize you. Does that happen?
Oh yeah, all the time. I literally posted this up yesterday because I post up all the negative shit I get as well. Like I reply to all my comments, good, bad, neutral. I reply to all of them.
Wow.
Partly because I think there's benefit in it. So I talk about in Rewire Your Mindset about the purple polar bear. This is what I come back to all the time. When somebody says, Chris, you're a purple polar bear, Brian, you're a purple polar bear, you're like, okay, that's okay. Sure, mate. Yeah. And you forget about it a second later. If somebody goes, you're stupid or you're fat or you're ugly, and you're like, oh, I felt that one. I felt that. I didn't feel the purple polar bear, but I felt that one. That's time to get curious that's an emotional attachment you have. And that's something that I need to work through, because if I got triggered or activated by that means that it's a specific thing to me. There's potential gold in that if I can work through that, it won't bother me the next time. So when somebody says a negative comment to me, one, I understand how psychological projection works. So people tend to project their own insecurities and their own issues onto you. That's just what we do as a human species. Anyone that's gone through and met anybody in life has seen this at some point. When someone's like, oh, Brian, you shouldn't do that, or Chris, you shouldn't do that, or Will, you shouldn't do that, or John, you shouldn't do that, or Mary, you shouldn't do that, because they're saying that to themselves. Most advice we get from people is just advice that they're offering to themselves in another shape or form. And we have to completely drown that out, especially in the beginning. When you're running a business or you're in marketing and you're helping people and serving them in a meaningful way, or you're a brand getting hate and negativity from some person on the outside, it normally means that person's going through some shit. Like, I'm really empathetic to that. Like, if somebody's coming on calling me really nasty things on social media, their life's in a pretty bad fucking place, because like, if you've got that inside, you need it. Like, you can't throw hot coal at somebody unless you're holding on to it yourself. You can't have and project that negative anger onto somebody unless you're holding it internally yourself. And I know that, and I'm empathetic towards that. Now, sometimes people are just being dickheads because they're having a bad day and this is the way that they get out of it. And I get some fun out of that, because I literally reply sarcastically to a lot of replies and comments, i.e. the ones that I link up on my Instagram stories or Instagram DMs from people messaging. But doing the filter of the purple polar bear helps a lot, because then you know that, well, this is something I need to work on. This isn't what they've said, because if they called me a purple polar bear, I wouldn't have been bothered by this. But they called me fat, or they call me ugly, or they call me stupid, and that really bothered me. That means I clearly have a trigger around that word, and that means there's an emotional reaction going on within me. And I put everything through the filter. If it's hysterical, it's historical, i.e. if I'm replying or responding hysterically to something, it means it's historical. There's something else deeper down there that I actually need to work through. And I actually think that's a really positive thing. So actually dealing with the negativity, dealing with the hate, understanding psychological projection of people, and that it's something that they're just going to do, helps a lot for me when it comes to navigating that online.
I think that's quite an interesting point. I mean, bringing it back to marketing for a moment, a real kind of problem and challenge, particularly for social media managers, is, when a social media manager is on numerous social media accounts every single day, week in, week out, probably running 5 or 6 accounts, often running customer service, and they're at the sharp edge of just getting abuse from consumers who are very emotional, very angry. And actually there's a psychological impact of that. And a lot of people find it really, really difficult, don't they? So that idea of kind of reframing it and the purple polar bear analogy, I think, will be really useful. I wanted to ask you about resilience. So I think in all forms of business, resilience is really important, isn't it? And I think particularly in marketing, when you're launching campaigns, Often you'll put an enormous amount of work into a campaign and it maybe won't connect with consumers and it will fail. And then you've just got to move on to the next thing and you've got to move on to the next thing. So that kind of idea of resilience is really, really important in business. Practically speaking, how can people build more resilience then when it comes to their professional life?
It's interesting because I wouldn't necessarily have resilience as the term I would have used personally for marketing campaigns. And as an entrepreneur and someone that runs a couple of businesses and works with a lot of businesses, failure is part of the process. And failure isn't final, failure is feedback. And generally in a marketing campaign, all the line I've used is the seed of failure, planting the tree of future success. That's how my entire business and every marketing campaign that I've ever done has gone down. And I think it's similar for a lot, that when you realize that, yes, it didn't work, but that's not a negative reflection of you. You tried and now you can pivot and you can course correct and you can use that failure as feedback. That is knowing that this is part of the process. I think when it comes to the resilience, it's a slightly different angle because resilience is something you can build. And I think similar to what we talked about earlier with the ice baths or going for the run or the workout, you build up an element of self-discipline which ties into your resilience. Your self-discipline is the ability to do the thing you have to do regardless of how you feel because you know your life will be better as a result of that. And then when you do that repeatedly over time, you end up building these layers and blocks and anchors of self-discipline, which actually from the outside look like resilience to people who are like, oh, he's so resilient. They're so resilient. When in reality, they're just actually really disciplined. And then you've got that failure as feedback and you're using it as part of the process. And I think when you know that, it's the quote, it's so cliche at this point, but the quote of, I didn't find 1,000 ways that the light bulb didn't work. I just found 10,000 ways that it didn't work. And then you eventually stumble onto the way that the light bulb worked. Like all those cliches that we hear in business are true because you're just failing forward. Like I think failure is only final when you decide to quit. And there's times when you have to quit something and move on because your ladder's against the wrong wall. You don't quit because something's difficult. The ice bath, running, a marketing campaign, a business goal. You don't quit because it's difficult. You quit because it's directionally incorrect. And now you need to move on. Same as in a bad relationship. How many of you know guys that are going out with a girl or a girl that's going out with a guy? You're like, man, they should cut the cord with that. They are toxic for one another. And for whatever reason they can't. You would never say it's a bad idea for them to quit that relationship. It would be better for all of them if they did. So there's scenarios in life when you should quit. You just don't do it because it's difficult. And failure is exactly like that. You don't quit the marketing campaign or quit the job or the goal. You course correct and use the failure as feedback. And as a result of that, you end up building self-discipline because you know it's the thing that's ultimately going to help you. And then resilience is built on top of that.
So, Brian, this show's all about mistakes. What's the biggest mistake you've made in business, do you think?
The most tangible one that's actually relevant, and this is going to sound so obvious, is not learning from the mistakes of others. And this is what I love what you're doing with the podcast, lads, like embracing marketing mistakes. You're learning from the mistakes of others so you don't have to make them yourself. And I would also say, and I'm a big Charlie Munger fan, so Warren Buffett's business partner, Charlie Munger, is one of my favorite people on this planet. He died last year. I've read all the books about him. Poor Charlie's Almanac is one I go back and reread every year. And he's got a great line in there that he says, just tell me where I'm going to die and I won't go there, which basically means like, tell me all the things that could be a death blow for life or my business in general, and just don't do that, because you can die in business, in marketing, a couple of ways. You can die with a death blow, or you can have the figurative death by 1,000 cuts. Both will kill you, and avoiding both of those, I think, is important. So if I could go back a decade ago, 12 years ago, I would have listened to podcasts like this. I would have read more books. I would have worked with mentors. I would have cut my learning curve and not made the mistakes myself.
So you did it the hard way.
I did. I'm sadistic sometimes when it comes to things like that. 100%. I will also add another mistake I made. This was a bit more specific for me, but looking the part and wanting to look successful versus being successful was a big thing for me. I didn't realize I had such an insecurity around success that because I left a teaching job, which was a quote unquote safe and secure job, wasn't a particularly well paid job, but it was safe and secure in the traditional sense of government job, etc. I was so afraid of what my friends and family members would think when I left that I went out and I bought the branded gear and kit. I got the business cards. I wanted to look the part before I was actually generating any revenue and having any clients. That was an internal insecurity on my side. It was one of the reasons I went broke the first time. The second time was just taking on way too many overheads. Like overheads equals death in a business if you're an entrepreneur versus a marketer, that if your overheads are too high. I was living in London, renting a gym in London, renting a space, and my overheads were just, there was way too much month at the end of the wage, like just points where I just had to decide if I was going to eat that week, and I couldn't. That's more entrepreneurial than just marketing if you're in with a company, but that was definitely up there with me too, having my overheads and my spending too high when revenue wasn't coming in at the level that it would have been several years later.
So you said you don't like social media, but you're doing videos regularly on social media. We're talking high numbers as well. How long do you spend on? You said you'd spend too much time. How much time a day or a week do you spend marketing on social media? And is that you've got your podcast, but what other sorts of marketing do you do? How do you split it?
Yeah, it's a really important one, because the thing is with social media, and I actually don't want to be too negative on it, because social media was the initial thing that got me off the ground and allowed me to get into markets and niches that I wouldn't have had access to in a one-to-one space, either even in London or then when I moved back to the west of Ireland. So I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater completely, but for me, social media it's a tool. It's an amplification tool for my message, for either trying to help and serve people, because I'm at a different stage in business now. I'm at a place where I don't have to worry about money. It's not a thing for me. It's all about getting the right fit of people into programs, into courses, and trying to serve in a meaningful way. I'm at a different stage now. 10 years ago, it was revenue. I needed to keep the lifeblood of the business going, or else I couldn't help anybody. So it changes in terms of the seasons. And with social, now it's just an amplification tool. So I don't spend as much time as you think. So we batch create our content. So we put out, we do 12 videos, so 3 a week, that are properly edited videos with my videographer. We record them 2 hours a month. He edits them and then sends them to me, and they go uploaded, but my assistant normally uploads a lot of them. We clip the podcast, which again is done internally through the team, which goes up onto social. And then if I have an idea of a reel or a video, I'll just create it kind of off the cuff. But generally, I don't spend too much time doing it. So a few hours a week. I spend most of my time replying to DMs and messages of people in my audience, because they're normally really good people. Like, there's a lot of negativity on social media. I've got really good followers. Like, the people that are following me, like, you unfollowed me ages ago. If you don't like the way I swear, you unfollowed. You don't like the way I talk, you unfollowed. You don't like the way I look, you unfollowed. You think my teeth are stupid, you unfollowed. Like, for whatever reason. So there's a selection and an availability bias there, that the people who have stuck around tend to be people who are either positive or want to see the good in the situation, or who just genuinely want help or genuinely want to say something nice. So I spend a lot of time cultivating my audience, and so that's what we use it for. That's one tool. The podcast is another one. The book serves as a marketing tool. It worked with you, Chris, as you mentioned. We've got lead magnets that are kind of working for evergreen email campaigns, so we do a lot with that as well. We've got the website. When I appear on podcasts, that indirectly works for marketing, because it brings new people into the ecosystem. Collaborations, speaking at events, a whole host of things that tend to be quite beneficial on the front end in terms of reach, but have a long tail end, such as a podcast. You might be listening to this the week it comes out. You might be listening to it 6 months after it came out. And as a result, you found out who I was. So that ends up serving as a top of funnel for people coming in to either potentially buy a book or a program, or just follow because I'm putting out content that helps them in a meaningful way. So we go with a bit more of a shotgun approach, more so than a sniper approach. In marketing, you'll go shotgun or sniper, i.e. targeted or omnipresent. We tend to go a bit more shotgun approach and omnipresent versus sniper rifle and targeted.
So I'm curious. You're in a sector that, superficially at least, fitness, mindset, coaching, that feels like a really busy sector, particularly on social media. I mean, there must be 1,000,001 people, not as good as you necessarily, but talking about similar issues. So how do you cut through? I mean, I think one of them is this kind of commitment to real community management, genuinely engaging with your followers. So that feels like a real strength. But how else do you kind of cut through in what ultimately is a really noisy sector?
I'm big, and this is something I do a lot of work with my mentees. So I'm working on the next book at the minute, which is a business book. It's called Scaling Your Story. So it's pulling out your story. It's a book. It's a marketing book. It's pulling out the individual story. So I'm using case studies from things like companies like Apple, who historically have been very good with this about leaning into being different and using the stories, and then using that for a personal brand and going into the things that you struggle with, and that's what makes people connect with you. So when I'm creating content online, I'm generally trying to lean into either a story through my side or a story through a client side, something they've struggled with. And again, nobody can out Brian Keane. Nobody can out Joe Wicks. Nobody can out James Smith. These are other people in fitness. You have to lean into your story. So, I've had issues with things like mental health. I've had issues with things like abuse in early childhood. I've had issues with alcohol dependency during times in my life. I've had serious issues with body dysmorphia and food relationships, things that are all part of my story. So I lean into those because I'm out the other side now. You can only talk about a story that you came out the other side on. And I'm able to lean into those. And that message connects authentically with the people who it needs to connect to. There's other areas that have no direct contact to me and will never be part of my story. So I'm not going to speak about those things. So one of the ways that I rise above the noise is a combination of picking a niche and going targeted into it, but also pulling out my story so that people can authentically connect. And I live by the life that, love me or leave me. I would rather people get so much from my content and that they love what I do, or fucking hate me, and be polarizing. I have no problem with that. Absolutely none. Because you need to stir an emotion in people. And for every person that thinks I'm the biggest twat ever, there's going to be someone else who's like, he helped me so much through that struggle. I couldn't figure out my mindset. I had anxiety. I had depression. I was struggling with mental health. I was struggling with suicidal ideation. And I saw Brian came out the other side, and now he's making his message. And that's serving as inspiration for them. So I live my entire marketing philosophy off being fine with polarizing people as long as it's authentically true for me.
Fascinating. And I think, that absolutely is applicable to brands, isn't it? This idea of authenticity, if you fake authenticity, people will just spot it a mile off. Like you say, you can't just talk about issues that are too much of a stretch for you.
And it's the personal story. Yeah. He's giving his personal storytelling. So that's what pulled me in, because it was really authentic that you're talking about things that you've struggled with and how you've used that to, again, through mistakes and failure, use it as feedback. You constantly come back to that, just use it as feedback.
And that idea of being unapologetically you, I think is really relevant for brands as well. And I think often you see brands trying to appeal to everybody, don't they? And in turn, they actually appeal to nobody. But those brands that are really singular in their approach and do divide people actually have probably got much more committed fans and advocates. So yeah, fascinating.
What was the catalyst to growth then? You had all these different elements. You've got lots of different revenue. You had this big failure. The one story that stuck with me is when you did fail, I think it was on your second business, you were that skint that you had to, and I don't know if it was over exaggerated on the audiobook, but you had to find the money in your house,
in the back of the couch,
the back of the couch to get the bus
to onto the bank. No, true story. Literally happened in my house in West London. Yeah.
Which part of London was it?
So I was in, sounds so stupid. It'll make sense now when I tell you that I was living in West London in Chiswick, across from, I think is it the George? Is the name of the bar? I've forgotten the name of the bar now. But there was four teachers in this tiny little apartment, but in a really nice part of Chiswick. But that's a true story. I had to, because I ran out of money. It was the first time ever in my bank. It was 000 because I didn't have an overdraft. I had to go down to the bank to get an overdraft so I could pay my rent that month. So I had to get money down the back of the bus or down the back of the couch for the bus to go to the bank so I could set up an overdraft so I could take money out to pay my rent that month.
And what did you do the next day after that? Because how did you turn that around?
I didn't. I went back onto, at the time, which is going to sound so bad but it's true, is I was done. I was done with fitness. I went back onto what was the supply teacher. I signed up, I think Protocol was the name of the company that get you into teaching schools or into schools as a teacher, as a supply. And I signed up for that the next day and I was like, I'm done. I'm done with fitness. By pure chance, the way it ended up working was I was in a school and I was doing long-term supply teaching, so substitute teaching in a school. And one of the teachers who was in the classroom next to me was preparing for a wedding and had heard that I was a personal trainer. And she asked me, she's like, will you train me? I was like, look, I'm not doing that anymore. I don't even have the gym. I was paying for Fitness First in Shepherd's Bush at the time. And again, hence why I went broke. And I was like, oh, I'm not doing that anymore. She goes, look, please. She was like, I'll come to your house. I was like, I don't have enough room in my house to train you. And she was like, well, will you do Chiswick Park? I was like, will you train me in the park? And I was like, yeah. I was like, if you want, I'll do some bodyweight stuff with you and, we'll see how it goes. And she goes, perfect. So we ended up doing that for 6 weeks. I didn't take any money off her for the first 3 or 4 weeks. And then she insisted after that. And then she ended up losing a load of weight to prepare for a wedding. And I was like, oh, I'm actually not that bad at the personal training side. It's the business stuff I haven't figured out. I actually understand how to help somebody lose weight. So that was kind of a, gift from the universe in terms of this, how it happened. It was just pure random. She was in the classroom next to me. Zoe is her name. She was, getting married and she's from New Zealand. I think she moved back since. And I was like, just by pure chance, that built my confidence back up. And it also made me realize that the failure wasn't final and that I had wrapped all of the failure. I was a failed business person. I wasn't a failed personal trainer. They were two different things. So when I was able to be a successful personal trainer, I was able to fill in the gaps on business. And once I started to do that, the whole thing came together.
That's good. I mean, the thing, if you do own a business, if there's people out there that own businesses that are listening to this, like, you fail all the time, every day. Yeah. And in marketing campaigns, I'd love to say that every PR campaign that we've done, our social media campaign we've done, has been an absolutely rip-roaring success. We've won shitloads of awards. We've done amazing campaigns, but we've also done some things that have literally... Not necessarily because of us, but when you've advised. But some campaigns just don't work. You can see them a mile away as well, usually. But sometimes clients just want to do them, don't they, Will?
Yeah, I mean, I love this idea of how did you phrase it? A failure is feedback, and that's absolutely right. And actually, if you're not failing, you're not pushing hard enough, really, are you? If you never fail, then what on earth are you doing? You're not taking any risks.
Yeah, 100%. You're playing way too safe. And the thing is, if you can rewire failure, not only as feedback, but failure as a positive thing, like, I love it now. Now, obviously you don't want to fail all the fucking time, because like, if you do, it's going to be a disaster. But micro failures for macro success is a very real thing in business and marketing, that you can have micro failures. Just make sure they're not death blows, and then course correct, because you're only in a marketing campaign. You guys know this. I know it from running my business. You're one word change away. You're one story away. You're one graphic change away from turning a massive failure into a rip-roaring success when it comes to a marketing campaign.
We should use that in a pitch. That's true. Another thing that I thought was interesting, and in your mindset, is that you say surrounding yourself with positivity is key. So you talk about surrounding yourself with positive people, and then you're bloody brutal when you're talking about, if you've got people like the teacher in the playground that you talk about who are quite negative, just cut them out of your life. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and how people can get rid of negative people either that they're working with? How do you do that? You're stuck in a marketing job and you're surrounded by negative people trying to one down you all the time. What's the expression?
Bring you down.
Bring you down, yeah. How do you cut them out?
Yeah, we want to be more positive. So tell us how to do that.
It's an interesting one, because you have to audit the situation. I think in the case of the teacher in the playground, I had no control over that. There's some things you can control, and you can remove certain people from your life, and some people you can't. In that situation, I had to change the situation because I couldn't change the person. So it ended up being the mental gymnastics we talked about earlier. Sometimes you have to try and find the good in people, and some people, not everyone has it from perspective. Some people you're just going to clash with, and that's okay. But there are times in your life when the danger is in the dose with negativity in people. You can handle a little bit of it, but if it's 80 or 90% of your inner circle or people you're spending time with at work, it's going to pull you down. My mom used to always tell me that if you lie down with dogs, you get fleas. And I think negativity is exactly like that. If you lie down with enough negative people or you're around them all day, it's very hard to not let that impact you in some shape or form. So I think you have to be able to cut certain people out. But again, if it's a family member, you might not be able. If it's a work colleague, you might be able to just, go to the opposite side of the building and not have lunch at the same time with them, or they're going to be around somewhere, you're just going to avoid them. There's lots of different tools and tactics you can use. But ultimately, I think it depends on the situation. I probably need more context in terms of what you're specifically speaking about, because there's so many different tools you could use in this scenario. But if it's just someone in your work environment or people in your work environment that are being really negative, removing yourself from that, and like attracts like, because there's going to be other people who are feeling the same as you. They're going to be like, I don't want to be in that lunchroom. It's really negative. And then you go spend your lunch in their office or in their department or in their site. And again, there's lots of different ways to maneuver around it. Again, if you want to go specific and give an example, I can, because it's hard to go wide without knowing more situational context.
So people aside, then what else can we do on our own that's going to make us more positive people? Is it about a gratitude journal or something like that? I mean, that's what you always read about, isn't it?
The confidence table, isn't it, Brian?
Yeah, I love that. The confidence table is something I'm a big fan of. So what I normally say, positivity, confidence, self-esteem, these things are kind of interconnected, without getting too woo into the kind of the gratitude side, which I will get into in a minute because it does tie in. But the confidence table is a concept that I use in my own life, which people seem to really like from the book, is that every time you keep a promise to yourself or you set a small goal for yourself, you end up adding legs to a figurative table. So if you picture a table and you say, right, I'm going to jump in the ice bath this morning, and you did it, you add a small leg to that table every single day that you do that. Same as the mornings you said you were going to go to the gym and you went, or the days you said you were going to turn off your phone at 10 p.m. and you did it. There's small promises that you repeatedly kept to yourself. That's adding legs to your table. Then every once in a while, you'll set a big goal, such as the case of running like a marathon, or running a couch to 5K, which is the equivalent of a marathon to somebody else, or absolutely smashing a marketing pitch that you were really worried about. They're big legs to the table. And consistently over time, you end up building this internal confidence. And if you can do that, negativity tends to impact you less. What I always tell people is the start of a new journey is always the most difficult. New relationship, new job, new marketing campaign, new health or fitness regimen. The start is the most difficult part of every journey because you don't have the confidence yet. And you can also build confidence by having competence in something. And you generally don't have a lot of competence when you're new at something. So that's when it's very easy for them to figuratively knock that table because you only have a couple of legs on it. But over time, if you have a strong table, one of the reasons the social media comments don't bother me now is I have a lot of legs on that table. A lot of legs from different things where I backed myself and I powered through, that a random comment from YouTuber 1234 isn't going to bother me at this day and age. It just isn't. Where, 12 years ago, it probably would have, because my confidence table is stronger. And that's the same with family members or friends, or thankfully not work colleagues, because all my work colleagues are people I've hired. So it's fine. But work colleagues that you wouldn't have control on, if they were negative, it's easier for me to kind of bounce the ideas off, because I'm like, oh, it's fine. I know what I'm doing. I know I'm directionally correct. I'm happy with how I'm showing up in work and in this and in that. You don't get impacted by it as much. So there is an element of what can you control, and the control. And I love the gratitude journaling and rewiring your mindset to see the gratitude in situations, because we have a hardwired negativity bias. It's what's kept us alive evolutionary for years, because our ancestors, if they saw something rustling in the bushes and it was a tiger or an animal or something higher on the food chain, it ate us. And we're a byproduct and ancestors of people who have passed on that fear gene that supported people, kept them alive thousands of years ago. I'm aware that's our default, and that's why we have a negativity bias. So gratitude journaling and gratitude affirmations rewire your mindset to default to something that's primitive and hardwired, and it's an old brain for a new world. So you're changing that. So there's definitely merit to that. But also, what can you do today? Well, how can I win? There's an acronym in the book. What's important now? How can I win? WIN. What's important now? What can I do today that's going to build a little bit of confidence so that I'm able to deal with any negativity that does come my way? And then there is an element of just being that, person that keeps those promises to yourself more often than not, building the legs in your confidence table and knowing that that's actually going to be the thing that helps you move through any negativity from the external world, because you have this internal positivity, because you're backing yourself because of the self-confidence that you've built.
Yeah, because you guys talking about marathons, I hate running. I used to run 5-6 kilometers. I've done 10, I think. a few times, but I hate running. I'm not built. You're a bodybuilder and you'd run, which is an unusual combination. I don't know how you or Will put that foot. You said about putting that foot in front of each other, like, because it's a figurative thing, isn't it? Like putting that foot in front of the other foot, it fucking hurts. And like you're running and you're like, I've got to get all the way home in a minute, and I might as well just turn around. And I don't know how people keep going. I don't get it, and I don't know how. So I take my hat off to anybody. Not that I've got one, but I take my hat off to anybody that can just keep going on, do more than 5K, 10K. You know, fair play to you. It's discipline. I don't know how Will does it, to be honest. How do you do it?
You can learn it. Yeah, you could learn it, Will. Would you agree that it's something you learn?
It is, yeah, but you absolutely. I mean, it's a process, isn't it? It's a process, and it's knowing it's going to end at some point. That was important to me, and
I'd rather it end earlier. That's the issue I've got.
But I mean, the idea of that idea of I felt a lot of the lessons from running absolutely apply to all walks of life, though, don't they? About playing the long game, about properly preparing for something, about being patient. All of this stuff is so applicable, and it absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's awful, isn't it? I mean, I can't imagine what an ultra marathon's like. I mean, I don't feel like I could have taken one more step after doing 26.2 miles, but I suppose maybe I could. Maybe I should sign up for an ultra marathon next year. There we go.
It's all relative. The thing is, like, I always tell people, because I've done multiple ultra marathons, multi-day ultras, things along those lines, and like anything after 15 miles sucks balls. Like, I don't care what anyone says, even if you love running, it just fucking sucks. Like, so the difference between 15 and 30 miles and 50 miles and beyond, like, it's all horrible, it all hurts, it's all difficult, like, but there's a lot of post-traumatic growth that comes from that, and there's so much crossover. I think ultra endurance, more so than any other fitness, has the most crossover for marketing and business, because as you mentioned, you're keeping the end in mind. You know it's going to be over soon. You have to plan accordingly in the lead up. You have to put the hours and reps in. You have to course correct. You have to take 2 steps back sometimes for 3 steps forward. Sometimes you have to adjust and go on the fly and make a call on the fly. Like, they're all things that are very applicable to marketing that directly cross over to ultra endurance. So you can learn the tools that will serve you in marketing through a fitness endeavor like marathon training or half marathon training or ultra marathons, because of the crossover. So I think when you have a positive reason and a non-domain dependent knowledge that this will actually make me a better business person or marketer, that sometimes can be a strong enough anchor for getting through these difficult races.
If you've been on the show now, Brian, if you were us, who is the next person you would interview for this show to hear about their mistake that they could share that would be interesting to our audience?
One of my favorite people is Marcus Smith or Tom Otten. They're actually both in Dubai. They're both ultra runners and ultra marathon runners, but Tom runs the largest digital marketing agency in Dubai, and Marcus runs Inner Fight, which is a massive CrossFit box in Dubai. Both of those, not only on top of being incredible individuals, they're both friends of mine, but they have a great perspective on business, on marketing, on failures, on fuck-ups from either business or fitness, and how they all tie together. And they're just two incredible people. I don't think you could go wrong with either or both.
Well, I might have to get you an intro to them, mate. They sound great. So how can people get hold of you, Brian? I mean, just basically Google is quite an easy way to get hold of you, because you respond to everything, apparently.
Yeah, well, on Instagram DM, I always tell people Instagram DM is the only thing I'm on. Everything else is either automated or goes to my assistant. I don't do my emails. I hate email. And I don't do Facebook Messenger. That's all automated as a reply. But I am on Instagram DM. It's the one place that I'm on directly. And I always tell people if they want to message directly to go on there. But I'm on everything. I'm on all the channels. I have 3 podcasts: the Brian Keane podcast, my health podcast, the online business podcast, my business podcast. And then I've got a GA Lean Body podcast, which is a top of funnel lead generation for GA players for one of my scale programs. And then the books are everywhere. So it's just really, if you like audio, if you like video, if you like written, to check out wherever it might be potentially serving, whether it's health, fitness, mindset, or any of the above, or anything we talked on in today's podcast.
Yeah, and I recommend the book. It's great. It's great. And what I liked about the book, actually, on the one that I've listened to, Rewire Your Mindset, is that during it, you say, basically, I've done this book so you could listen to it today, and what you get out of it today, you could re-listen to it in a year's time, and your objectives have totally changed of why you're listening to it. Like mine was the squash thing, but actually it depends on where you are and what you're doing, and it can depend. In your life stages, you just had kids, or you've just changed jobs, or you've just done. It really, I can see you've done it for all sorts of different things. So yeah, I can highly recommend it. Thanks for coming on the show, Brian. That was really great.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I think we're both off to sign up for ultra marathons now, aren't we, Chris?
Sorry, well,
Maybe.
I'm still not having lunch with you tomorrow.